Marx and Engels wrote this book, as Yara mentioned in the beginning, a very long time ago, but about a place in the world that was experiencing an economic system that hadn't yet, traveled around the entire globe. In Europe, the capitalism was, thriving, if that's how we want to describe it. But in other parts of the world, in the underdeveloped world, the economic systems were very different. So does that affect the way that we can use this text? And, how can we explain that, considering that Marx was writing about a place and time that was very different than the rest of the world?
First, I think it's true to say that Marx and Engels focused on European capitalism, which they saw as capitalism in its most pure form, where it was also possible for them to analyze the development and the contradictions of capitalism in the most clear fashion. On the other side, if you look at Marx's writings, for example, on slavery, you can really see how Marx and Engels already also understood that capitalism also thrives on modes of oppression that came before it and somehow integrated it into this new form of domination. I mean, already the French revolutionary bourgeois, to a large extent, depended on colonialism in Haiti, for example, and were not too pleased with the so-called Black Jacobins and the revolution in Haiti. So I think in that sense, Marxists always already thought about, analyzed, and also fought, battles outside of the epicenters of capitalism. On the other hand, many things that Marx and Engels analyzed for 19th century European capitalism became features of global capitalism that now rules the whole world as we know it. For example, already in the Communist Manifesto, they talk about crises of overproduction. So whereas in former economic systems, a crisis would appear because there was too little of something, a shortage of corn, etc. And in capitalism, crises appear absurdly because there's too much of something and it can't be sold for a profit. It's not that people have too much under capitalism. The big majority does not, but the fact that things can't be sold for a profit suddenly becomes a factor for a crisis under capitalism. Just think of how many thousands of tons of food are deliberately destroyed under capitalism, while millions starve just to keep prices stable. What I also find even more astonishing about their analysis of capitalism and how it's actually even more relevant today than probably at their time is that already in 1848 they write about how in every class society, but also already under capitalism, a mode of production, a system of society like capitalism does not only develop productive forces, bring them forward, but also halts their development and even turns them into destructive forces. I mean, Marx and Engels writes in 1848, always remember that, for many a decade past, the history of industry and commerce is but the history of revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against the property relations that are the conditions for the existence of the bourgeois and of its rule. So today, this couldn't be more true. I think in every single challenge society faces today, the capitalist system is the main obstacle. If you think about patents, a bourgeois invention, if there ever was one, which massively slowed down the COVID vaccine rollout and through that killed hundreds and thousands of people. Think of restrictions that are put on the internet, a force of production which could potentially give free information, education and culture to every single human being. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And it's not just that these potentials are wasted, which Marx and Engels already analyzed in 1848, but also how these potentials are used in a destructive way. Already in 1848, in the German ideology, Marx and Engels say that under capitalism, the productive forces become, for the majority, destructive forces. And I think it's safe to say that today's capitalism is absolutely dominated by these destructive forces. We don't use drones to make our lives easier, but to kill each other. Think of whole branches of industry that fight against environmental regulations because their profits would suffer from a healthy climate. I think capitalism today is even more, by far more destructive than it was in the 19th century, but it's kind of amazing how Marx and Engels already said that in 1848 capitalism is absolutely destructive at a time when it hadn't even developed to the extent that we know it today.